Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Gosar for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As an understanding of fairness is one that we almost instinctively learn from birth. Nothing offends a little child more than a sibling getting a treat and he or she doesn't. And America really hates cheaters. Just ask Lance Armstrong. Remember Deflategate? The uncovery of the steroid era was not kind to baseball. That is why beating women in women's sports is so obnoxious to the American public. Not only is allowing men to play in women's sports a flagrant violation of fairness, as well as posing a danger to women in the locker room and the bathrooms, making women feel the opposite of unique, as then anyone can become one, it normalizes and encourages the terrible reality and tragedy of children mutilating themselves in a misguided and hopeless attempt to change genders. The Family Research Council cited the World Professional Association that the transgender health as a source of the following list of awful diseases that cross-sex hormones cause. Here's a list. Blood clots, high triglycerides, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, high red blood cells, a destabilization of some psychological disorders. It defies common sense that mutilation improves mental health. For the love of God to everyone who promotes this terrible ideologies, desist, stop. Every time you claim a man can play a woman's sports, every time you tell a child that they can be whatever gender you want to be, every time you read a book to a child promoting this propaganda, you are risking the health, happiness, and well-being of our children. Please stop experimenting with our youth. Ms. Gross-Graves, I want to ask you a question. Is the genetic composition of a transgender versus a woman the same? No.
Well, I'm not a scientist. But
well, we're talking about science here, so I mean, I hope they're not the same. So that's why you see all these physiological differences.
If I can answer, though, I mean, if your question is how do you define woman, a woman is an adult female, but there's a lot of variation that goes beyond my level of high school biology.
Well, I just got to tell you, you can't, I'm not looking at a definition, I'm talking about the science. The science genetically is a man is a different genetics than women. Plain and simple. That's just what it is.
I guess what I would say is that it is, I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but it's my understanding that it is more complex than what you are saying, in that there is variation among men and among women, and sometimes more variation among than there is between. Again, I'm not a scientist, and you know, I don't think the panelists are scientists either. It seems like it may be a different scientific hearing that you can.
Well, that's why you have the differences. That's why you see muscle mass. That's why you see tidal volume. That's why you see all these.
Right, there's variation. So, for example, in the WNBA, there's players that are 5'5", and there's players that are 6'9".
So let me.
There's wide variation.
Now that you brought that up, let's talk about that. So the center for the Arizona, the Phoenix Mercury, she had to get a genetics test to prove that she was a woman. Did she not?
You know what?
She did.
And it's actually going to the problem with these sorts of sex verification and sex texting.
Well,
that when I think about what all women, but especially Black women whose bodies have historically fell outside the sort of typical, what's considered the typical norm, the idea that people would have to prove up their femaleness to play is horrifying, and it's going in the wrong direction. I don't think anybody wants that, especially for young
I theoretically
children.
disagree with you. I think we've got to be real with people about what their aspects are. Riley, how does playing in women's sports affect? How do men playing in women's sports affect the esprit de corps of a team or the team spirit?
Speaking to, again, my lived experience, first and foremost, it was a major distraction to have a male competing with us at that national championships. It was all we could talk about as a team. We were fearful to go into the locker room. We had to wait and watch if Thomas came out. Then we would enter to avoid going in at the same time. Of course, our sport is very physical, but there is a mental aspect to it, and allowing men into our sports certainly negatively impacted that mental aspect, as well as the physical, of course.
Ms. Perry, what are the likely costs to educational institutes of complying with Biden's new Title IX rule, which makes it almost impossible for schools receiving money to limit women's sports to only women?
This isn't just cost to education. This is cost to the federal government and taxpayers. It's cost to the medical community. It's cost to reduce lunch programs. And that's because Title IX intersects with Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act and the Food and Nutrition Act, which is the USDA's Reduced School Lunch Program. That means that implicating this particular rule doesn't just affect sports. It affects everything from nutrition program funding. It affects the cost of litigation. It affects the cost of implementation, now requiring open locker rooms, open bathrooms as well. The cost of implementation, in addition to what are certain to be personal injury lawsuits as a result of the fact that these female students are now getting concussions, dental injuries, facial injuries. A school that does not protect its biological girls, maintain sex-separate spaces, is certain to going to be facing significant financial harm.
Thank you, Ms. Perry. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair